This episode of the podcast is sponsored by I Love Growing Marijuana. Now that you're ready to grow your own cannabis, they have everything you need over there, from seeds to nutrients. They even have a complete grower's guide that you can download for free. So click on the link in the show notes to get to their website and to take a look at their seed bank. Now don't forget, Delta Leaf Labs has the plant DNA sex testing kit that you need. They make it real simple to take a sample from your seedling, and then you send that sample off to the lab, and a couple of days after they get it, you'll know exactly whether you've got a male or a female plant. So go over to deltaleaflabs.com, order your testing kits, and at checkout use promo code IMGS10 for 10% off of that order. Alright, now let's start the show. Well, everyone, welcome back. This is the In My Grow Show, the podcast dedicated to taking the mystery out of cannabis. I'm your host, Alex, and I want to thank you for taking the time to show up and listen to me. This is episode 41, and it's the Sunday right after Thanksgiving. I hope everyone had a great time hanging out with their family. I know I did. As I mentioned before, we made ribs, and usually when I make ribs, I'll pick up the ribs from the butcher, hand them over to my wife. She'll do that voodoo that she does and get them ready for me to put on the grill. And then I'll cook them up and, they come out just succulent and perfect and, just beautiful. Well, this time, I decided, I was going to make it easy for me, easy for my wife, since we weren't going to go anywhere, since it was just going to be us three. So I decided to get some of those pre-seasoned ribs already packaged, because the idea was to just open the package and put them on the grill. Real easy, right? Well, it was easy, and they came out good, but they weren't great the way they usually are. So I learned my lesson on the pre-seasoned packaged ribs, and that was that there are no shortcuts to great ribs. Ooh, I like that. Alright, a little later I'm going to play a conversation that I recorded with Dr. Jake Felice. I got him back on the podcast to talk about digestive problems and how cannabis could help those. But before that, I'm going to do the strain of the week. And this time it is for the Sour Fire. I couldn't find too much information on, the lineage of Sour Fire. But just from the name, yes, it is, crossed with the Sour Diesel. And the best I could come up with is that it's crossed with the Fire OG, which makes sense, because it does have that little gassy, fuely smell from the Sour Diesel. But it also has that little citrusy, kind of lemony taste and smell to it. It had a nice, long-lasting high. It wasn't like a punch in the face kind of, bam, you're super high. It put me in a really good mood, a really chatty mood. It was great for work and getting stuff done also. But this isn't something I would use to party with. I like my party cannabis to be a little more heavier, but that's just me. If you like your cannabis a little softer, the Sour Fire was perfect. And I picked that up at Ojai Greens, and you can find them at 410 Bryant Circle in Ojai. Something else I wanted to talk about is that Sespe Creek Collective, another cannabis dispensary up here in Ojai, has an exhibit up, and it's called Pot Lifers Museum and Pot Fairy Gift Shop. Both of them are curated by cannabis prisoner advocate D.D. Kirkwood. And it says here, the Pot Lifer Museum showcases a dozen people serving life sentences for nonviolent cannabis crimes. The exhibit includes an impressive prison art collection by pot lifer Michael Pelluter. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Each original painting is for sale and was created behind prison walls by Pelluter. The Pot Fairy Gift Shop lets people support pot lifers. It offers unique handmade handbags, teas, necklaces, and aprons for sale, with proceeds from all purchases going to the Pot Lifers commissary accounts. Visitors are also presented with easy steps to take action to support the prisoners, such as signing clemency petitions and writing letters to the prisoners themselves. Okay, you must be 21 and over with a valid ID or 18 or older with a valid recommendation to get in, because it is at the dispensary. The exhibit opened on November 23rd at Sespe Creek Collective, and you can find them at 408 Bryant Circle, Suite C. All right, now let's move on to the report from the Cannabis Front Line. So here's what's going on around America concerning cannabis. It was announced that Senator Chuck Grassley, chair of the Judiciary Committee and longtime prohibitionist, is stepping down from his position. As chairman, he refused to hold any hearings or votes on marijuana-related legislation. Well, I'm glad good old Chuck is getting out of there, and hopefully somebody younger, a little more open-minded about cannabis is getting in there. We shall wait and see. Now in Michigan, new legalization laws go into effect on December 6th, which is when adults can start legally possessing and growing marijuana for personal use. Listen to that, folks. Michigan is less than 2 weeks away to being able to grow cannabis without any fear of somebody kicking your door in. Well, without any fear of the law kicking your door in. Still got to watch out for people trying to rob you. Also, in Kalamazoo County, Michigan, prosecutors are dismissing marijuana cases. See, just another sign that the dominoes of prohibition are falling. Ooh, I like that too, dominoes of prohibition. All right. Next, in Massachusetts, recreational marijuana sales began this past Tuesday. Feels good, doesn't it, Massachusetts? Feels nice and relaxing. Feels extra smooth, huh? Now that it's legal, now that you don't have fear. Also, Connecticut Governor-elect Ned Lamont said the legalization of marijuana is one of his priorities in 2019. The Senate president said it would be pointless to keep cannabis illegal when neighboring states are ending prohibition. Lawmakers from both parties say legalization is likely in 2019, and that's in Connecticut. And Vermont Senate President said he expects a bill legalizing marijuana sales to be finalized by early January. And the Jackson County, Missouri prosecutor announced that her office will stop prosecuting most marijuana possession cases. That's music to my ears. I loved all of that. And don't forget, folks, you still have to show up to your city council meetings. You got to make sure that you're getting all the things that you want from cannabis. Growers' rights, so you can have easy access to medicine and recreational cannabis. Do you want some of those cannabis taxes to go towards free in-state college tuition? You got to show up for that. You got to demand that. While you may have legalization in your state, your city, your county, you still got to work for what you want. We can't get comfortable. We still got to stand up for cannabis. And I got all that information off of the NORML website, that is normal.org. Go over there, educate yourself on what's going on, and become a member. Well, brothers and sisters, I'm going to take a short break just to get some liquid refreshment because I am getting thirsty. I feel like I've been talking for a while. So I'm going to put on a little bit of music, and when I get back, I'm going to play that conversation that I had with Dr. Jake Felice. He was cool enough to come back on the show, and we talked about digestive problems like ulcerative colitis, Crohn's disease, acid reflux, pancreatitis, and how cannabis could help some of those conditions. It was also a really interesting time because a buddy of his stopped by that had some video recording equipment. So we recorded video on part of the podcast. And it was just cool to see what it would take for me to actually do a video podcast. I'm still on the fence about whether I would or wouldn't. But it was cool to see what I would have to do to actually get that done. Anyways, so hang tight and I'm going to play that conversation for you.
To keep us together, alright. Just a little love that we want. Just a little love that we need. Just a little bit of love. Just a little love that we want. Keep us alright.
Once again, I'm back with Dr. Jake Felice. Dr. Jake, thanks for coming back on the show, man. I appreciate you coming back on and talking to me.
It is my absolute pleasure, Alex.
Thanks, man. So, before we get started into digestive and cannabis, see how well it helps, somebody had asked me about our last conversation about CBD. And they were wondering how much THC do you really need to get that entourage effect with your CBD tincture? And you said something, I believe it was like 1 to 2%. You don't need a lot.
You do not need a lot of THC most of the time. Most of the time, a small amount can be very effective. So even in non-psychoactive levels, you can get relief. And we know this from studies where cannabis shows pain relief with high CBD and very low levels of THC. You still get an entourage effect much of the time, especially for pain, for example. When we talk about other things, there might be a need for higher levels. For example, if in the case of digestion, if we're talking about anti-nausea approaches.
Oh, sure.
CBD does have anti-nausea properties, so it can be helpful. But so does THC. And a lot of the times for an anti-nausea, especially for a cancer patient, a little more THC can be very appropriate just for that nausea and appetite stimulation. But again, a lot of folks are very interested in CBD predominant products. You can get a lot of relief with a high CBD, low THC product. You get that little bit of THC, however, even if it's less than 2 milligrams, for example, can still provide a lot of effects through entourage.
Yeah, the kind of tincture, well, not so much a tincture. I like to get an oil that's about an 8-to-1.
Okay.
And that usually comes in a syringe, and I just, push it out a little rice size,
Yep.
But a lot of the tinctures, they're mostly suspended in coconut oil or olive oil. Right?
Okay.
Yeah. So it's all about really how much CBD or THC is in that actual solution. Though.
Yes, that's right.
Let's explain to people what decarboxylating cannabis really does. So raw cannabis, if I just pull it right off the plant, it's not going to really get me high, even if I eat it.
If you pull it right off the plant, it is not going to get you high if you eat it right away.
And that's because all the cannabinoids, they have this acid molecule attached to it. Like THC has THCA, CBDA, and so on. And when we heat it up or through ultraviolet light through time, that acid molecule kind of evaporates away. And that's what gives us the more activated compounds, the more activated cannabinoids. So now, the question is, does the cannabinoids in their acid form affect us differently?
They do affect us differently. We don't have as much information on the cannabinoid acids. So when you survey the literature, you will see the term cannabinoid acids as a term. That usually stands for CBD acid or THC acid. The other word you'll hear is a term called neutral cannabinoids. Neutral cannabinoids are the things that we have probably heard of first, like THC, just straight up THC, also known as delta-9 THC, or CBD cannabidiol. In the living plant, we don't have the THC, we have the THC acid, and also in the living plant we don't have the CBD, but we have the CBD acid. So in the plant they are in acidic forms, both of which are not psychoactive.
How does that, when we ingest it, like let's say, let's go on to digestion as far as like irritable bowel disorder.
Okay.
Which in both of those, it's what is it, Crohn's and ulcerative colitis?
That's correct. So there is a difference between irritable bowel disorder, known as IBD, which includes ulcerative colitis and Crohn's disease, IBD, irritable bowel disease, and something called IBS, irritable bowel syndrome. So Crohn's and ulcerative colitis fall under the IBD category, and both of those are autoimmune diseases where our body's immune system thinks that the intestine is the enemy and it attacks our intestines. And it can be life-threatening in the case of both of these diseases. There can be mild disease, there can be more moderate disease and more severe disease, and as much as 30% of the folks end up needing surgery for the more severe conditions. So that's the main mechanism of action in terms of how the disease is occurring. Our body's immune system gets hypervigilant and goes on the attack.
So now, IBS, it's considered a syndrome. So does that mean they really don't know? It's just a collection it's a collection of symptoms.
That's correct.
That's what a syndrome is, a collection of symptoms.
And also with IBS, if we take the patient and we do a colonoscopy where we actually are able to visualize the inside of the intestine, with IBS, the inside of the intestine looks fairly normal versus IBD, which is, again, Crohn's disease, ulcerative colitis. We actually see the results of the immune system's attack on those tissues. So when we send a little camera up through the intestines with IBD, irritable bowel disease, Crohn's, ulcerative colitis, you will see very drastic changes in the way the intestine looks. And in certain circumstances, there can be an ulcer or an erosion all the way through the entire intestine in severe cases. So you actually can have the immune system blow a hole in the intestine. Very, very challenging, difficult to treat medically. We do not have a lot of options for either of those.
So just so we have some clarification, Crohn's disease affects the small intestine?
Crohn's disease can affect anything from the mouth all the way through, but typically we think of it as an intestinal disease versus ulcerative colitis, which is more localized to the colon itself, the large intestine.
Wow.
Yeah.
So now, and on both of those, one of the big issues that I've read, I don't know all of the details, but one of the big issues is the inflammation of both the intestines.
Huge.
How do they treat both of those conditions right now?
Both conditions are treated depending on their severity. For more mild indications, they can do things called salicylates, which are basically aspirin derivatives. But more severe disease will require antibiotics and or immunosuppressive medications, including corticosteroids. And if the condition is not stable, or if it progresses, surgery is also an option where they literally remove either a part or all of the colon. Not a very desirable circumstance, and also a huge impact in terms of the quality of life of the patient. It can be a lifesaver, but it is also a game changer.
So is that where people get those colostomy bags?
That would be one of the reasons for those, yes, could be. Mm-hmm.
Wow, yeah.
And also they can also just take out sections, but a colostomy bag, that would be one of the reasons and one of the results of having your colon removed, yes.
I can see how that would affect you, even just your body.
Everything from how you deal with taking a bathroom break at work to taking a trip up or down the coast, several hours in the car, your whole life becomes changed.
Wow. So how does cannabis help with those conditions?
Well, we do have some pretty good studies on Crohn's and ulcerative colitis. There's a very small study out of Israel, looked at a small number of patients with smoked cannabis. With my patients, I prefer to give an oral agent, which I can talk about later, but the study used a smoked marijuana, an Israeli study, and I'm going to underestimate the numbers. I think they're actually higher, but something like 60% of the patients achieved a complete remission in these studies with the cannabis. So how in the world is that happening?
Wow.
Well, first of all, we don't know exactly, but we have some ideas. One of the things that cannabis provides is mechanisms to prevent against autoimmunity. So the cannabinoids can literally or calm the immune system down. The way I think of one way to describe the immune system in an autoimmune disease, and autoimmune diseases are interesting. They appear to be on the rise, meaning more and more of them. Think of an agitated crowd. You know, there's a Bob Marley song, "A hungry man is an angry man." Think of an angry crowd, and for whatever reason, but justified anger. That crowd is much more likely to have something crazy and uncontrollable happen with their behavior than a very relaxed crowd. So that if you think of immune cells like a crowd, in an immune compromised, or rather in a patient with an autoimmune disease, there is a hyperreactivity of the immune system. So if I am in a stressed out state and I'm cooking dinner with my girlfriend, I might be much more likely to snap at her and say something that is either mean or inappropriate if I'm stressed. If the immune system is stressed, there is a much more likelihood that it might just pop off and fire in the wrong direction and start attacking something that it really likes, such as our body's own cells. We don't know exactly why autoimmune diseases are happening. There are a lot of theories as to their causation, but we really don't know enough about that yet.
Okay, so let me just stop you there. So what you're saying is it could be that stress itself could stress out ourselves to the point to where our immune system is just looking for something to do.
With the digestive system, psycho-emotional stress is a factor in both IBD and IBS. They can contribute. They might not necessarily be sufficient to do it, but there's also other things like chemical stresses, toxins in the environment, etc. So. Also with ulcerative colitis, a recent infection with a salmonella. So we just had Thanksgiving and there was a big scare about...
lettuce? Or?
That was an E. coli, but other bacteria like Campylobacters can predispose to ulcerative colitis in folks with there is a family history. So if you have a family history of it, you are at a higher degree of a risk. And usually how it presents with abdominal pain, it can be diarrhea and some bloody diarrhea. And it really requires a skillful clinician to diagnose it some of the time. So first line treatment, the first thing we do is we give salicylates, which is kind of like aspirin-like compounds. And then if those don't work...
But wouldn't aspirin kind of aggravate?
Aspirin does aggravate. Well, this is aspirin aggravates stomach,
right?
But this is a slightly different. It's a 5-amino salicylic acid. I don't know the degree to which it irritates, but its main mechanism of action is anti-inflammatory. So that brings us to two ways that cannabinoids can help. We do know that cannabinoids can modulate autoimmune processes. So they can suppress, for example, type 4 hypersensitivity reactions, just a very technical term. But cannabinoids can slow down the immune system's attack. They can also provide anti-inflammatory aspects and pain aspects. For a lot of these conditions, pain control is important, so the cannabinoids can be very helpful for that. Also, when the intestines get gassy, they can distend, so they can kind of blow up like a balloon, and that can cause pain and discomfort as well. Cannabinoids can help with that. When I have patients with ulcerative colitis or IBD, I have had good success recommending oral products that you take by mouth. I just mentioned that study where they used smoked cannabis and it was effective.
Is there something dietary that they can do to control IBD? What's the best way diet?
Certainly there are FDA-approved medical foods that can turn down immune processes. Metagenics is a company that makes those. And as a naturopath, we are very interested in food sensitivities, not just food allergies. There's a different immunologic mechanism. I do think that food sensitivities can be contributory. It's a hypothesis, but it's something that I see works very well clinically when we change the diet for some folks. But I have to tell you, Alex, it can be very challenging to treat some of these conditions, and there's a high rate of failure for both conventional therapeutics and others. Now, that being said, I have had some of my patients go into complete remission with ulcerative colitis using oral cannabinoids. I prefer, rather than a smoking or an inhalation, I prefer to give it in a coconut oil or an olive oil. I have a pet hypothesis that some of those oils make it through the stomach and can act topically as well as centrally. But that's yet to be proven. My cannabis patients who have done really well have done oral, either coconut oils or olive oils, heavily oiled, lots of oil going through.
What kind of ratio do you prescribe to them?
We don't know about ratios, but I do think there is both a role for CBD and THC. CBD provides anti-inflammatory effects. It is also really good for the anti-spasm of a lot of the cramping pain that folks get. CBDs and THC are both anti-inflammatory, I typically recommend higher doses for these patients. So what I typically do is 25 milligrams CBD and THC, if they can handle that much, 2 or 3 times a day in an oil. And then for symptomatic, if there's a lot of cramping, the topicals on the abdomen can be very effective for some folks as well, for that kind of a cramping pain that folks get.
Oh, that makes sense for the localized kind of pain.
Yeah.
Cramping. So getting back to something you said, and this is just about dietary, there's a difference between food sensitivity and a food allergy?
Yes, there is, and that is not an area of a specialty, an area where I have a specialty, but for those of your audience who are very technically oriented, an allergy is typically mediated by what's called an IgE immune response. It's a type of an immunoglobulin. It's a very specific allergy reaction. Most foods don't cause that. Some folks with celiac disease, that's an IgE mediated. But there are other immunoglobulins besides the E, the IgA, for example, and others, where a lot of functional nutrition folks do believe that some of those sensitivities may not actually cause frank or overt disease, but they can really irritate those immune cells and get them riled up so that they may not. Think of a bar fight. Someone who's drunk is likely to pound somebody a lot more into oblivion than a sober person. So if you're an immune cell and you're getting pushed up against your limit by a food sensitivity and there's a trigger, you might not only attack, but you might attack with a viciousness that would not normally be appropriate in that circumstance. That's what an autoimmune disease is. It's literally an attack that is going to the wrong place and in a degree that it is over the top.
So it's just unfocused, or not focused in the right way. Then.
Not focused in the right way. Focused and aggressive in the wrong way.
Got it. Wow,
Yeah.
okay.
So cannabis can be helpful for that. Absolutely it can.
The next thing I want to talk about, just keeping on the whole digestive issues, is pancreatitis. Now, I don't know if cannabis is effective for pancreatitis, because pancreatitis is what the pancreas helps us digest sugar and fat. Is that what it does?
Pancreas has several functions. Sugar digestion is one of them. Fat digestion is another, and it also makes hormones like the hormone insulin is created in the pancreas. So it is both a digestive organ for helping with digestion, and it is also an endocrine organ for hormones. Both of those can be affected in pancreatitis. There's 2 main types, acute, which is a sudden one, and a chronic, which is a more of a long-lasting. And there was a study in 2013, and I believe it was in the journal Pancreas. They found that CBD does have anti-inflammatory effects in a mouse model, not a human model.
Sure.
And then they did one in 2007, and they also found that not only did the cannabis reduce inflammation, but also helped with pain. And we know that the cannabis is very helpful for pain. Another thing is, we talked about the acute and the chronic. One of the mainstays of treatment for the chronic is pain relief. So definitely the cannabinoids can play a role in the pain relief. However, There is a cautionary tale, and I have a hypothesis about this. I do not know if it's true because it needs to be tested, but I have a hypothesis. It is believed by some people, and there are a few studies, that cannabis can actually cause pancreatitis in some circumstances, and it's usually with young men. Usually under the age of 35. And I have a hypothesis about this. One of the things we know that pancreas does is it helps in fat digestion, right?
Right.
What do young men do, some of us, and I'm not so young, so I shouldn't put myself in that category, but what do young men do when we smoke a lot of cannabis?
Well, we eat a bunch of junk food.
Eat a bunch of junk food.
Yeah.
And that in and of itself can indeed irritate the pancreas. So what I'd like to see are studies that differentiate that, especially if it's a high-fat diet, like a lot of ice cream.
That's an interesting...
So it's a hypothesis.
Yeah.
It's a hypothesis. And this is why we need more studies. But that is...
We need more human studies.
We need more human studies, yes.
Because we know how to study a rat pretty good. We just
rats have very similar properties to humans, and they have also very different properties to humans. So,
some studies just don't translate very well. Does having pancreatitis, since it affects insulin levels, does it affect diabetes, or can it have?
It certainly can.
I'm wondering if there's any connection between having pancreatitis and developing diabetes, or vice versa.
That's not an area of specialty. What I can say in terms of diabetes, where I really go in terms of cannabis and diabetes, is THCV, tetrahydrocannabivarin, THCV. Very effective for prediabetes and diabetes. Also, CBD has some protective properties for diabetes. One of the things that diabetes does is, with diabetes, we have high sugar in our blood. So the muscles are not able to, our cells aren't able to bring the food in with diabetes, and that sugar, bacteria love sugar, for example. So diabetes predisposes folks to bacterial infections. Number one cause of adult blindness is diabetes, because the sugar in the blood gets into the blood in the retina and causes an oxidative reaction on the nerve endings. Also can cause kidney damage. Diabetes is a very serious condition. Some of the preventative aspects, I think there may be roles for cannabinoids. I like the CBD and, as I said, the THCV for that, and there may be others. I think that...
So does the THCV, do we know it helps control...
Blood sugar. Helps control blood sugar. Mm-hmm.
Really?
Yes. There's studies on that.
Wow.
It's very, very interesting.
No, that is really interesting, Wow, that's amazing.
One of the interesting things, and we don't need to talk about it now, but for folks who really want to use these cannabinoid acids for their own therapies, the home grow, in my opinion, is one of the best ways to use cannabis, especially cannabinoid acids. There is a doctor, William Courtney, who's also a California doctor. He has a hypothesis that after a certain age, typically the age of 40, the cannabinoid acids become dietary essentials, so that we actually need, as his hypothesis is that we actually, as humans, especially as we age, have a dietary need for these acids. What's interesting about the acids is they're remarkably unstable, meaning they're very easy to decarboxylate. I did a lot of research on this, and it was very interesting what I found.
Yeah, because different cannabinoids, they'll decarboxylate at different temperatures.
That's right.
Different temperatures. So
and thermal instability, temperature instability will readily cause a decarboxylation of that THC acid, which won't get you high, into THC, which definitely does. And it appears to be something that is really hard to control. Almost all of it happens. So if you are wanting cannabinoid acids, I would say the best place right now to get them is the fresh plants.
It's just to pick it off the plant. Pick
it right off the plant, and you can put that in a tea. Let me read some of the things. So THC, I'm just gonna go through some of the research I did because this is all new to me and it was fascinating. So first of all, it's very unstable. So most products that say they have THC acids in them but no THC are actually, since that test, have changed, and they now will have less of the THC acid and more of the THC that's on the label. An ethanol or alcohol extract versus an olive oil extract, they're different. THCA is much more stable in olive oil than in alcohol. Huh. So the tincture could potentially, what's the makeup of the tincture? Also, I mentioned that there's a temperature difference, but even, Alex, before I did research on this, I would tell patients to juice their cannabis, put it into ashtrays, and stick it in the freezer. And then when you need it, you pull out an ice cube and you pop it in, and that's how you get your THC acid. But what I learned is that even at temperatures well below freezing, like way colder than what the normal freezer would be, minus 18 degrees centigrade. I don't know what that is in Fahrenheit, but that's really cold. Losses are still occurring, so the THCA is still turning into THC even when it's freezing. Also, they will decompose in darkness. They'll decompose in darkness. So it's not just the light that does it, but the temperature is also a huge factor. Remember I said the cannabinoid acids and the neutral cannabinoids? The neutral cannabinoids are stable. The THC is stable in the cool environment, and the CBD is stable, but the acids change. So I thought to myself, this is no good. The only option is juicing it. It turns out that's not necessarily the case, and this is a really interesting treatise on the natural medicine. Herbal cannabis is actually the THC acid in herb in the flower is more stable than in just about anything else. And why is that? Because where is this THC acid? It's in the trichomes. In the trichomes. And the trichome is resinous, and it's like it's hermetically sealed. It's almost like what is inside of that trichome is like a mummy. And so we know that mummies don't decompose. So the herbal cannabis is hermetically sealed within the trichomes, and so if you keep your bud fresh to the refrigerator, that is a good way to do it.
That'll keep the acids from evaporating off or switching.
Yeah, because the resins seal everything, so there's no air getting into the inside of the trichomes. There's nothing getting in there, and if the Egyptian mummification processes uses resins and terpenes. Interestingly, it uses pine resins. And most of the resins in mummies are found in the bandages to seal it in. But also, as a side note, when I was studying this, it appears that based on the literature that cassia as a type of a plant was used in the Egyptian mummification process. And a lot of folks believe that ancient cassia in the Bible was actually cannabis. That's a whole nother study. But also, super interestingly, is hash. You're basically getting those trichomes and smushing them together. So hashish is a great way to keep your cannabinoid acid stable. So what I'm thinking of in terms of a homemade product is either a homemade keef or a homemade hash pressed or a bubble hash pressed. And then kind of like a chocolate chip cookie, you have the hash chips in the product. You have a much more stable product than just about anything you can get industrially, interestingly.
Yeah, I think it'd have to be like a bubble hash, because bubble hash, you can make it with bags of ice.
Yeah. Because you really want to get those trichomes isolated. And then the bubble hash breaks up nicely. And what you're thinking of is you're thinking of one of those bubbles is that bubble is on the surface can get attacked by the air, but inside of that, everything is protected. So if you have a big tray of bubble hash, that can go a long way towards preserving these THC acids. So this comes from
that and probably sticking it in a nice dark jar too.
Yes, and a dark jar, and the cold is helpful. If you go through the manufacturing process and you use ethanol, which is alcohol, and you break up these trichomes and you release the acids into this solution, they're not protected. So I thought this was really cool because this is about growing your own medicine, and ironically for the THC and the CBD acids, it appears that home products might have some advantages over very technically and expensively produced store-bought.
The advice that I usually give people if they're making home products with cannabis is if you're going to make a topical, you don't have to decarboxylate.
Right.
Because you're just wasting your time. Basically, it's really, your body's not going to really know the difference.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I only decarboxylate if I'm going to ingest something just so I can get that effect, that psychoactive effect.
Mm-hmm. Well, on the topical side, I do think that a decarboxylated THC can still be helpful. But you can certainly have a product that is not decarboxylated be very effective. And if folks don't want the THC, that's fine.
Yeah, and it's I mostly tell them not to decarboxylate if it's going to be a topical. One, because of time, and two, people who aren't familiar with it, they're really afraid of their dogs or their kids getting into it.
Yep.
So I tell them, well, then don't decarboxylate it. It's not going to activate the THC or the CBD or the psychoactive properties in it. A lot less.
I think that is true for short term, but for long term, I don't think that unless, and this is just based on the literature that I just read, so I'm not an expert in this area, but I do think that you do run the risk of having an unstable product with THC acids in it, because under all of circumstances that have been tested, nitrogen-only environments, cold-only environments, dark, there's always a decarboxylation process going. Now, granted, that could be slower or faster.
Right.
Cannabis tea.
So we are running the risk of eventually, at some point down the line, that acid is just going to evaporate off.
And God forbid somebody leaves that in their car during a hot summer and it gets up to 80 degrees, over 80 degrees centigrade in the car, and you can. So THC acid in a product does command respect, because you can have a product that is not psychoactive one day. Over the counter that you bought in the store is not psychoactive one day, but 2, 3, 4, 5 months later could be a whole different animal.
Could be a whole different compound. Yeah.
Interestingly, I did some cool research on cannabis teas, which is the predominant form used by a lot of traditional cultures, like in Jamaica, for example, for morning sickness for women. They use a cannabis tea. It's very low in THC and very high in CBD acids, etc. Let me find my notes on this, because
it's interesting because
it's a traditional formula.
Well, but I'm going to get hung up on the whole thing that the trichomes are hydrophobic. So how are we pulling the cannabinoids?
You got to use heat. Right. In the tea, and you need to use a lipid like a cream. You need to use a fat in the tea. You can't just get great question. This is why chemistry is important, and that is a proper thought process. That shows a deep attention to the why of cannabis, why things work, is almost really more cool than the fact that they actually do work. It's like the why of it. Absolutely. So,
some teas. What'd you find?
Cannabis tea. When you boil the water and you put the tea in, your acids are preserved. But if you put the tea in and then you boil the water, it decarboxylates. So if you're making tea, you boil the water first and you put the cannabinoids in. And even at hot temperature, not boiling, for 15 minutes later, you still have quite a lot of the THC acids and not so much. But you put that same tea in the refrigerator at 4 degrees centigrade, which is about 40 degrees Fahrenheit.
Trying to do the math.
Approximately. Ask Dr. Google. Dr. Google knows better than me. But 4 degrees centigrade, cannabis tea stored for 24 hours, you lose 71% of the THC acid and it turns into THC. So you take that cannabis tea and stick it in the fridge overnight, you have a different product in the morning than you did in the nighttime.
You'll be making tea later.
So you make some tea and you drink it right away for nausea and vomiting and pregnancy. And what's super interesting about those tests, there was a test in Jamaica on pregnant and nursing moms. And the kids of the moms that had the cannabis tea, they did not have any detriments in any major areas, and they actually had some advantages in others. So with a limited study, what we have is we have a traditional product that is providing a very safe doses in a very stable and natural way, outperforming theoretically some of these very expensive products that are on the shelf right now.
But not just that, they've been doing it for longer than they've been making pharmaceuticals for that condition.
Longer than the word pharmaceutical has existed. In India, they would do it in a yogurt. So you would extract it into the bong is in a yogurt. But yes, the traditional way.
The bong, the drink bong?
Yeah, BHANG bong. Yeah. And it's a hashish-based drink. Now, I think they do decarboxylate that, but I'm not a...
But they make it out of a yogurt?
And when I was in India, there is you can buy these products. It's not technically legal, but they sell them everywhere for religious purposes.
I've seen that.
And the ones there are very psychoactive. So the cannabis tea may be not psychoactive. The bong, the reason I use that example is that's just a lipid pulling the fats, pulling it in.
That's all basically, yeah.
So don't use just water. Put a little cream in there for sure. A lot of cream, as a matter of fact.
I'm gonna try that. I'll make some nice tea. All right, so let's move on to acid reflux. So acid reflux is just basically the acid going from your stomach back up your esophagus. Is that right? Or?
Yes. So the esophagus is the tube that goes from the mouth to the stomach.
Right.
It's like a garden hose.
Mm-hmm.
When I was a kid, if I got hiccups, my dad said, stand on your head and drink a glass of water. Have you ever done that? You can actually drink water upside down and it goes up into your stomach because the muscles of the esophagus will pull it up into the stomach. So there are muscles in the esophagus, and one of the muscles between the esophagus and the stomach is what keeps your Thanksgiving dinner in your stomach and not in your mouth after you've eaten it down. So the problem with reflux is that valve between the esophagus and the stomach doesn't work right. And the acid...
Is that like a little sphincter or something?
It's a sphincter.
Okay.
It's a sphincter. It's a circular muscle. Just like a cinch bag. Cinch it up in your stuff. When the acid from the stomach... Our stomach has very thick skin, many layers, lots of mucus, is really designed to protect itself against the acid. The esophagus isn't. So when that acid gets up into the esophagus, it literally is burning your esophagus with your stomach acid. And over time, that creates problems, the worst of which can be esophageal cancer. So that's one of the big, huge risk factors of chronic reflux, is not just the inconvenience factor of tasting your food at all hours of the day or night, but the fact that it predisposes you to a greater risk.
Now, is that because the acid is going to wind up just corroding the lining of your esophagus?
Exactly. And the reason it corrodes the lining of the esophagus and not the stomach is because the tissues are different, and the stomach protects itself. Because it's designed for that. Right. The esophagus is designed to move food,
to swallow,
not designed to digest food. So when digestive products get up there, it burns. It burns.
Eats through it. Okay.
Yeah. So now there is. You talked about the sphincter. There is the problem with reflux is that sphincter relaxes when it shouldn't. Reflux will happen normally about once an hour for the average person. It's a normal occurrence. But when there's a lot of food and it's happening more frequently, it can be a real problem. So approximately 25 to 35% of the U.S. population will have this at some point in time, which is why when I say you taste your food again, we all know what that means. Yeah. It's coming up again, and it tastes different, doesn't it? Yeah. And it will give you a sore throat sometimes, won't it? Yeah. Or if because it's in the wrong place. The same thing down there. So one of the interesting things about it has to do with the genetics of how the cancer develops. So there is a gene that makes cannabinoid receptors for the esophagus tissues. So the tissues in the esophagus have cannabinoid receptors in them, believe it or not. Huh. So your cannabis that you take orally will affect those receptors in the esophagus. Part of the problem with cancer in the esophagus, esophageal cancer, is the endocannabinoid system is decreased. And there's a gene called CNR1, and it is found in a lot of patients with esophageal cancer, and it's decreased. So I want to make sure I say this right. For patients with esophageal cancer, there is a high likelihood that their cannabinoid receptors are not enough. So by stimulating or adding external cannabinoids to those receptors, there is a hypothetical mechanism to prevent esophageal cancer, one of the highest risks. Additionally, there are anti-inflammatory properties in the cannabis, especially if it's taken orally in an oil where it can really get to tissues.
Where it can coat the tissue.
Exactly. Okay. Before it even gets to the digestion, they're getting a little. So those anti-inflammatory properties are important, and also they can cause a little pain relief. Some folks don't have any discomfort with reflux. In fact, they don't even know they have it, but other people can get some discomfort. But the anti-inflammatory properties, I think, are helpful. So I think that I would never use cannabis specifically to treat GERD, but what I would do is, for a patient of mine who is already using cannabis, we can create things. So instead of taking a pill, for example, they might take that oil by spoon, or they might break open the coconut oil capsule and take the coconut oil by mouth. You can also get coconut oil, and you can put that, we talked about cannabis tea, you put that coconut oil right in the tea, it melts, and then there's your cannabis tea. So the topical treatment of the esophageal tissue is hypothetical, but it could be something that benefits the patients.
Sure. Yeah, that's a really good idea as far as the cannabis oil tablets or capsules.
Yep.
You can't break them open and just take them.
Absolutely. So if you do have reflux and pain and you are taking coconut oil tablets because they help with your hip arthritis, break those capsules open. They might help your GERD. They're certainly not going to hurt it.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Yeah.
That's a good idea.
Yeah.
Well, Dr. Jake, that's all I've got about digestion, but I wanted to talk to you about, if you know, last episode I did a segment about CBG.
Oh, yeah.
And I've learned a whole bunch about how CBG works, what cannabis plant mostly carries CBG.
Oh, good, because I'm...
So, yeah, it's really interesting. What I found out is that the commercial hemp plant is really heavy in CBG. Because CBG, it is the precursor, it is what makes THC, CBD, and like 3 other cannabinoids. Okay. Plant mechanisms, as soon as CBG is made, as it matures, the CBG is either going to turn into THC, CBD, or a few other cannabinoids. That's in the drug form of cannabis, whether it's sativa or indica. Okay. That enzyme that's going to change the CBG into these other cannabinoids. But since commercial hemp doesn't have that enzyme switch to really produce a lot of THC, it hangs on to a lot more CBG that it creates.
So I have not looked at CBG probably in depth since probably 2015, and I did it for Willie Nelson's had a company called Wyatt Enterprises when they were going to enter the Washington market, and we looked at CBG. I could be wrong, so what my preface is, I could be wrong, but at that point in time, it seemed that it was very hard to source a high CBG plant, and we had to go to Europe to find the genetics for that. And I would imagine those genetics have since crossed the pond and have now proliferated, but I do not know. What I do know about CBG is if it can be stable in the medicine, it's very good for pain. And you probably know a few other things that I don't know about that.
Yeah, well, I've been reading that it's really good. Well, for one, it's non-psychoactive. Well, no, I should say it's not intoxicating because all cannabinoids are psychoactive, in my opinion.
Okay.
But it's not intoxicating, and it's in a high volume in commercial hemp.
And that would make sense if the enzyme that converts it is not going. But my question then is does that push it instead of to THC? Does that mean it makes more CBD, which would make sense? I'd have to look into that. It's a very good question.
Well, I would think it probably does help it in creating more CBD, but it seems like from what I've read that it still hangs on to a lot more of that CBG.
Yeah.
That since the enzyme isn't there's no switch to really turn it on.
And this is interesting because I'm going to start looking for more CBG products. I've also seen a lot of CBN products on the marketplace. CBN is the breakdown product.
Of THC.
So we talked about decarboxylation, where the cannabinoid acid gets turned into THC, but then there's another process where even if it gets older, that the THC can turn to CBN. CBN is sleep-inducing, but is also very good for seizures. So the old cannabis on the shelf from 6, 9, 12 or more months ago, not going to have as much THC, but will have more CBN, much more likely to be more sedating, and may have some anticonvulsive or anti-seizure properties in them. So
yeah, I mean, I knew that CBN was the byproduct of THC breaking down and getting old, however that happens.
Mm-hmm.
But wow, no, that's really interesting about the seizure part of it.
Yeah.
So something else I wanted to talk to you about was I sent you an article. I don't know if you got a chance to read it or not, about the use of cannabis root.
Oh yes, I looked at that and I did not do my research on that.
That's all right.
I'm sorry.
I was just wondering.
That was fascinating. We'll have to talk about that again some other time.
Yeah,
Go ahead and ask
for
the
sure.
question anyway. Yeah.
I was just wondering if you had a chance to read it, what you thought
I did.
about it.
I
just wanted
briefly glanced at it, and what struck me as very interesting about it were a lot of the topical applications of the root, and they used the term decoction, DECOCTION in the article. See, I guess I did read it. But a decoction is typically a water extract, and we talked about the teas.
Right, yeah.
What was interesting, and that's why I need to look into this more, is that the water extract topically was working. So what does that mean? Well, it could mean that the CBD crosses without a carrier. It could also mean that those terpene molecules were also providing a positive effect, or both, the terpenes and the CBD were providing an effect. So the topical applications of that article I found interesting, but I know that wasn't why you sent that to me.
No, it was mostly because I was interested in that. It's not so much the amount. They found that it isn't a very traceable amount of THC or CBD in the root. They're working on more of, I think they're called, Friedanol and epifredanol.
Oh, okay.
So Friedanol, epifredanol apparently work on inflammation, but it's a different kind of mechanism.
Okay.
And they also found, and because apparently we've been using cannabis root for like in hundreds of years for gout.
Yeah.
That it really helps with gout just in taking just as, I guess, a diuretic in that sense, so.
Gout is extremely painful, usually affects the big toe and really hot, red, angry joint.
Yeah, I know.
The topicals can be very effective for that, and gout is no joke painful. I've never had it, but if you've ever had it, it's a.
No, I know people who have. I know people
thing.
who live with it, and it affects them.
Many folks feel that there are high protein diets. The kings of the Renaissance it's a disease of excess. Like
what do they call it? The rich man's disease.
Rich man's disease. Thanksgiving every night.
Yeah. Bunch of meats, bunch of organs.
So the a diuretic basically moves water through your body. So
right.
So there is a mechanism that may have some effect. Absolutely, yeah. And I would be super happy. I meant to look into that. I had just not left it on the Google Doc, but those roots fascinate me, and they have from the beginning.
Yeah, I wasn't sure if we were going to be able to take a look at it because I sent it, a week ago. And for those of you, I had found this study on, I believe it was Project CBD.
Uh-huh.
and I forget the lady who put it together along with a couple of other
It's
doctors.
an Italian researcher, if I'm not mistaken, and
Yeah, I
she's
believe
been
so.
doing research in the field for almost over a decade now.
Yeah.
So she's the real deal, and I was honestly surprised to see that quality of writing on Project CBD. I know I've met Martin Lee, and I think that he's a wonderful author. I don't know of all the quality of a lot of their articles, but that article, I read that, and it was very interesting. One of the mistakes in the article, if I'm not mistaken, if I'm remembering correctly, is I think they implied that the decoction was an alcohol base. But a true herbal decoction, and I'll have to double check myself on this, but I'm pretty certain that it is only a water-based extraction.
I'd have to go back and look at it now that I know what decoction means.
Yeah. I wanted to say that I am, for your listeners, I am in the early stages of putting together a cannabis kind of a road tour where I'm going to be touring coastal California cities, giving free presentations on medical cannabis with Q&A sessions. So keep in touch with me. I will let you know as soon as that goes. And also, if you personally or any of your viewers are owners of dispensaries or businesses and would like someone to come and educate the general public, that's certainly something that I would be happy and available to do.
Oh, absolutely. I'll let everybody know that.
Yeah.
Well, Dr. Jake, those are all my questions I've got for you today, man.
Alex, really great. Thanks for making the trip out to Santa Barbara. It's a pleasure seeing you as always. And I'll look forward to maybe in another couple months doing another one of these. Really great stuff. Keep up your good work. I do want to just say that growing your own cannabis is the cheapest and most effective way to know that nothing was sprayed on those plants. You know that there are no contaminants in the soil or in any of the production methods. And a lot of medical cannabis can be done in your own grow and in your own home. All right.
So, Jake, why don't you tell everybody where they can find you, either on the internet or...
You can just Google me, Dr. Jake Felice, drjakefelice.com. You can also find me through cannabismatrix.com.
Well, all right. Thanks a lot, everybody. Dr. Jake, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
See everybody later. Well, everyone, I hope that helped. I hope you learned something. I know I did. I want to thank Dr. Felice for all of his time. You can find him at drfelice.com. And I'll also have a link to the article about cannabis root in the show notes. If you have a question or a comment about this episode, you can email that to inmygrow@gmail.com. Or you can find us on Instagram at inmygrow. And everyone, that's all I've got for you today. Next episode, I'm going to talk to Subcool the Breeder. He was cool enough to put aside some time and talk to me. And that'll be on episode 42. And I want to thank all of the artists who let me use their music to put this show together. Now don't forget, if this episode has entertained you, or educated you, or even given you a little escape from your day, throw a couple of bucks our way and help support the show financially. By going to patreon.com/inmygrow. You can sign up there to be a monthly contributor. Or you can go to the website, inmygrow.com, click on the Support the Show tab, and buy a t-shirt. You can also click on the Amazon link in the show notes. If you can't support the show financially, don't worry about it, I get it. But here's how you can help. Subscribe to the website, subscribe to the podcast, and tell 3 other people about the show. That's real easy, real simple. Now don't forget, if you're a cannabis-related company and want to reach our worldwide audience, you can email me at inmygrow@gmail.com. Well, brothers and sisters, I'm going to get up out of here. Thank you for taking the time to listen to me. I love you all very much. And don't forget to always grow, learn, and teach.